I like my share of superficial blockbusters, too. I mean, I think I've seen Dumb and Dumber 8 times. But the question we have to ask, is that just enough for our movie culture? Is that enough for the society? If we want to get more out of entertainment than that, more out of films than that, then we've got to ask tough questions about making room for other kinds of films, other kinds of movies that aren't based on this hyper-commercial logic. Take a look at a film like The Full Monty. This offbeat British comedy that through the word of mouth in the US became a really popular film. Or something like The Blair Witch Project, which used the internet really in a clever way to get out and get publicity. What if instead of being the exceptions that proved the rule, there really was a space in Hollywood for that kind of film to be produced all the time? This country is brimming with talented people. The problem is we have a system that doesn't allow this talent to really develop and fulfill what it's capable of doing. To the extent we get great movies or original movies out of Hollywood, it's usually because some very talented and creative people have marshaled all their capital together from all their commercial successes to push something through that the studios would never do otherwise. The classic case in point recently was Warren Beatty, who after doing big hit after big hit for the studios was able to get Fox to go ahead and produce his film Bulworth, which is one of the most radical and interesting and creative movies that Hollywood made in a decade.
We can't get health insurance, fire insurance, life insurance. Why haven't you come out for Senate Bill 2720?
Well, because you haven't really contributed any money to my campaign, have you?
But Beatty, to do that, basically had to push everything I had onto the table to get it done. A lesser star wouldn't have had a prayer.
One of the wisest pieces of advice I was ever given when I went pitching, because that's one of the things that you do as a writer, you go around to studio executives and you tell them a story. Wouldn't this make a good movie? And a very friendly and smart guy who was at Universal at the time, named Tom Craig, said to me, "That's a really good story, and it could be a really good movie, but we would never buy that pitch because we don't want to buy things that have to be well made in order to be successful. That story, if it's not done with the right director and the right actors, will be a big flop. But if you say Tom Hanks and a bulldog are partners in a police thing, it could be the worst movie ever made, and we won't lose a dime."
Not too long ago, just 2 or 3 years ago, Siskel and Ebert had one of their television shows where they looked back at the 1970s, which is now considered the golden age of Hollywood film. And they made a list of the 10 best movies of the 1970s. And at the end of the show, they concluded that none of those films, not any of those 10 films, could have been made in the studio system that we have today. They all would have been thrown out because they didn't have happy endings. They didn't have the sort of unambiguous good guys and bad guys that films seem to have today.
The movies have always been a place where commerce and art have mixed. But in the last few years, this balance has really shifted dramatically.
If we think of filmmaking as a narrative enterprise, if we think of the filmmaker as obliged to tell a good story, which is a pretty, traditional definition, then we have to recognize that commercialism has, in many ways, distorted the whole enterprise of making movies.
Peter Bart, the editor of Variety, the main trade publication of the film industry and formerly a studio executive, has written repeatedly how today it's virtually impossible to make great movies. Once the marketing people get done with it and the focus groups get done with it, virtually all the integrity, virtually all the creativity is stripped out of the process. We've seen this happen in television, and now we're looking at it take place in films. The question we have to ask is, are we going to allow film to be hijacked like this by advertisers and corporations into the future?